Black CEO is asked to serve coffee. Minutes later, she takes command of a billion-dollar empire. Before we begin, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this story from? Type it in the comments. I love knowing how far these stories are reaching. And if you're into intense love stories, full of twists and heartwarming endings, make sure to subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss any new stories and you'll help this channel grow and reach more people. Are we in this together? Then, let's get to today's story. On a cold Monday morning, the skyscrapers of Chicago looked like they were swallowing the sky. A sharp wind blew across the polished marble sidewalks in front of Whitmore Industries headquarters, a billion-dollar empire built over decades, known for its mirrored glass facade and an environment where power wore ties and arrogance walked in high heels. Naomi Sinclair stepped out of the car with calm elegance. She wore a tailored, charcoal grey business suit with fine cuts that highlighted her upright, determined posture. Her natural curls were pulled into a high bun on top of her head, radiating authority. Her radiant, dark skin stood out against the cold, corporate atmosphere. In her deep brown eyes, there was focus and silence. The kind of silence you see in someone who knows exactly where they're standing, even if they're still viewed with suspicion. She walked into the lobby, her heels echoing on the marble floor. She headed toward the elevator. But before she could press the button, she was stopped by a blonde receptionist with wide eyes who gave her an automatic and judgment-filled glance. "Are you with the coffee service?" she asked in a rushed tone. Naomi stood still for a second. She could have answered. She could have said she was the new CEO, but she didn't. "Yes, I'm going to the meeting room," she replied calmly, and stepped into the elevator. On the executive floor, the Whitmore elite, white men in suits, most of them graying, were already gathered. Seated in leather chairs around a glass table, they murmured comments about the will left by Harold Whitmore, the company's founder, who had passed away 2 weeks prior. Ryan Whitmore, the patriarch's son, paced back and forth across the room, visibly irritated. Tall, blonde, perfectly dressed, face tense. He expected to be named CEO. The door opened. Naomi walked in with a tray in her hands, holding a thermal carafe and some cups. Everyone glanced up quickly. Some barely noticed her. Others frowned. Ryan pointed to the table and said, without even looking at her, "Put the coffee here. Quickly, please." Naomi stepped forward. She poured each cup with smooth, firm movements. Her hands didn't shake. Only her eyes were sharp, watching everything, like someone who had seen this scene many times before. Once she was done, she took a step back, and then the door opened again. A middle-aged man with grey hair, a navy blue suit, and a serious expression entered, holding a black folder. He was the Whitmore family lawyer. He walked to the center of the room, took a deep breath and said, "Gentlemen, thank you for being here. As stated in the official will of Mr. Harold Whitmore, I am here to begin the reading of the document that will determine the future of the company." The murmurs stopped. All eyes turned to him. Ryan crossed his arms, sure his destiny would be confirmed. The lawyer opened the folder, took out a sealed envelope, and held it up. "By Harold Whitmore's express wish, and with recognized legal validity, I inform you that the new CEO of Whitmore Industries will be..." He paused, intentionally, almost cruelly. "Naomi Sinclair." Silence. For 3 seconds, time stopped. One executive dropped her cup into the saucer. Another choked on his coffee. Ryan, pale, took a moment to process the name. Then, he slowly turned toward Naomi. She remained standing, elegant, composed. Her eyes now sparkled. "Is this some kind of joke?" Ryan mumbled, his voice cracking. The lawyer continued, "She is also the legal holder of 40% of the company's shares. That makes her not only the CEO, but the majority shareholder. Naomi then stepped forward, looked around the room, and said in a steady voice without raising her tone, "Serving coffee has never made me any less, but underestimating someone can bring entire empires down." The room remained stunned. Cups trembled in the executive's hands, and for the first time in that room, maybe in years, someone was forced to swallow their own prejudice. Silence still hung heavily in the meeting room. None of the executives moved. The most audible sound was the faint clink of cups rattling in saucers, still shaking in the hands of those who couldn't accept what they had just heard. Naomi, still standing, kept her gaze steady. The lawyer closed the folder and stepped aside, letting the weight of the news sink in among the shocked faces. Ryan was the first to break the silence, with a bitter, disbelieving smile. "You, CEO? There must be some mistake. This is a setup." She slowly turned to him. Her deep, intense brown eyes met his firmly, but also with a hint of sadness, like someone who had expected exactly that reaction. "Naomi Sinclair," she said, taking a step forward. "Graduated with honors from Harvard, MBA from the London Business School, fluent in English, French, Mandarin, and Spanish. International management experience in companies across Europe, Asia, and the United States. Leadership awards from Forbes and McKinsey." Everyone started exchanging glances. Quiet murmurs spread among the directors. She opened her structured leather bag and pulled out a folder. She placed it calmly on the glass table. Inside were printed copies of her resume and newspaper clippings with headlines like "Executive turns UK branch into model of innovation" and "The mind behind TechLogic's quiet growth in Asia." These credentials were sent to Whitmore even before Harold Whitmore's death. "I had 3 meetings with him, all documented. The problem is, no one really saw me. They only saw what they wanted to see. A black woman, too young for the job, probably in the wrong place." The CFO, a bald man with a stern face, frowned. "And why has no one ever heard of you?" Naomi turned to him without hesitation. "Because the spotlight wasn't made to shine on people like me, and when it does, many close their eyes." She walked over to the glass board beside the table and wrote with the company's pen. "Underestimating someone based on their appearance is the most expensive form of corporate incompetence." The room fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't disbelief. It was discomfort. It was shame. One of the senior board members, Mr. Bradley, white-haired and wearing a burgundy tie, slowly crossed his arms. "You speak well, but giving speeches doesn't make someone a leader." Naomi nodded. "You're right, but results do, and mine are in this folder, on your table. If you want to know what I've actually done, just read it. If you'd rather keep denying it, that's your choice too, but I'll be in charge, with or without your approval." Ryan suddenly stood up, his chair scraping back loudly. "This isn't over. I'll fight this. My father, he never told me any of this. Never." "Maybe because he saw who you really were." "Too late," Naomi replied, her tone firm, but not angry. The looks they gave her no longer saw the coffee girl. There was something new in their eyes. Discomfort, forced respect, fear. Naomi looked out the glass window at the back. The city outside moved on, cars weaving between buildings. She took a deep breath. Inside, she felt everything. The weight of the doors that had been closed, the dismissive smiles, the rooms where she'd been ignored, the times she studied quietly while others took the credit. And now, she was here. Not by luck, but by merit that had been denied for years. "This is only the beginning," she whispered to herself softly. And as she walked out of the room in silence, a certainty settled in everyone's chest. The new CEO wasn't just an unexpected leader. She was a revolution about to unfold. The meeting room door closed behind Naomi, but the silence inside remained. None of the executives could truly react. Ryan was still standing, fists clenched at his sides, jaw tight, breathing heavily like someone trying not to explode. The family lawyer, still present, cleared his throat gently. There was more, and everyone knew it. "Gentlemen, there is a second part of the will that must be read now. A confidential clause, sealed in a separate envelope with restricted access until today." He pulled another envelope from the folder. It was smaller, sealed with red wax, and Harold Whitmore's original signature. He carefully broke the seal and pulled out a handwritten letter. "What else is in there?" asked the legal director, uneasy. The lawyer read aloud, his voice steady but solemn. "The truth must be told. For decades I carried a secret with guilt, shame and cowardice. Naomi Sinclair is not only a brilliant professional and the woman I chose to lead the company I built with my own hands, she is also my biological daughter. Her blood is my blood. She is the result of a true relationship I had with Eleanor Sinclair in the 1980s, one I never acknowledged publicly due to fear of scandal and family pressure." The room froze. Ryan slowly sat down, as if his legs could no longer support him. His face went pale, eyes wide, staring into nothing. The lawyer continued. "Denying Naomi as my daughter was the biggest mistake of my life. But now I will let the world know. She is not an heir just by merit, but by right. 40% of Whitmore Industries shares belong to her, and no one can challenge that." The board members exchanged glances. Some whispered to each other. Others just lowered their heads. The CFO leaned back in his chair, visibly stunned. "That's impossible," one of them murmured. "She would be Ryan's sister." Naomi, still outside the room, was watching through the partially frosted glass. She had known this moment would come, but hearing it was different. It gave her chills. The kind of truth that changes not just business, but everything you thought was real. The door suddenly opened. Ryan appeared, his steps heavy, his face hard as stone. "This is a lie. This is a dirty trick. My father would never hide something like this from me." Naomi kept her composure. Her voice was calm, but each word landed like steel. "He did hide it, because he knew you wouldn't accept it, and because he didn't have the courage to face the world with the truth. But now, this truth doesn't depend on your acceptance." He ran a hand through his hair, as if trying to erase it from his mind. He was disoriented. "You want it all, don't you? The power, the name, the legacy. You're going to erase everything we built." "I don't need to erase anything, Ryan. I am part of this legacy, even if they wrote me in the margins for over 30 years. The words cut deep. For the first time, Ryan had no reply. The other executives didn't speak. There was something in Naomi's voice that no one could silence. The strength of someone who had waited a lifetime to exist out loud. The scene closed on her eyes fixed on the portrait of Harold Whitmore hanging on the company wall. The classic image of a white man, elegant, light grey suit, subtle smile. She looked at him and in a whisper barely audible said, "You didn't have the courage to introduce me to the world while you were alive. But now, I'll do it myself." And then she walked back into the room, this time with no tray, no fear, no silence. Naomi entered the meeting room again, her steps even firmer now. There was no more hesitation in her walk, no doubt in her presence. The silence that fell over the executives was different from before. Heavier, thicker, as if the air had been replaced by tension. The lawyer was still standing at the head of the table, holding a new white envelope sealed with gold. His eyes scanned the room, reading each face, each expression. There was disbelief, outrage, and in some, perhaps the most observant, a flicker of hidden admiration. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, "by direct instruction from founder Harold Whitmore, this is the final clause of the will, the one that determines the immediate future of this company's leadership." Ryan stood up again, his face twisted with anxiety. His eyes were on the verge of tears, but not from pain, from rage. "This is absurd," he muttered, looking around. "My father wouldn't do this. He was tough, but he'd never hand over Whitmore like this. Never." "If you have objections," the lawyer replied without changing tone, "you may present them in court, but first, listen." He broke the gold seal with a dry snap, slowly unfolded the sheet, like someone fully aware of the weight behind the words. "As of today," he began, "Ms. Naomi Sinclair will have full authority as CEO and majority shareholder of Whitmore Industries." The sentence hit like a bomb. The impact was immediate. One board member dropped his pen. Another shoved his chair back with a loud scrape. The oldest advisor, Mr. Bradley, leaned back as if the air had been knocked out of him. But no sound was louder than Ryan's outburst. "No! This is theft! An outrage! I'm the legitimate son! This is my inheritance!" He charged toward the lawyer, but was held back by two security assistants who had been discreetly positioned near the room under prior instructions from Naomi. "She knows nothing about this company. Nothing. I've dedicated my entire life to this. Since I was 18, I've been by my father's side. I learned everything. And now you want to kick me out with a piece of paper?" Naomi remained still. She simply watched him. Inside, her chest burned, not with pleasure, but with the pain of forced recognition, the cost of earning respect only through shock and confrontation. Then she spoke. Just once. Her voice slicing through the air like a scalpel. "You had 38 years to prove you deserved this seat. I've had my whole life to hope that someday he'd acknowledge me. Today, he did. And now, it's my duty to honor that name, even if he never gave it to me in life." Ryan tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The shock was all over his face. A man used to winning by last name, now crushed by a truth no resume, diploma, or influence could erase. The lawyer concluded, "This document is legal, registered, and already validated by the company's legal board. Naomi Sinclair assumes the role of CEO effective immediately. All administrative decisions now fall under her authority. Any attempt to interfere will be treated as a violation of the will's clause." It felt like the ground had shifted. Whitmore, once a throne reserved only for those with white blood and old power, now had a new voice in charge, and that voice was black, determined, and carried scars the corporate world had never dared to acknowledge. Naomi stepped toward the head of the table. She gently touched the back of the chair that had belonged to Harold Whitmore for decades. "I'm not here to do what he would have done," she said, looking each person in the eye. "I'm here to do what he never had the courage to do." And then she sat down, for the first time, taking her rightful place. Still seated in the CEO's chair, Naomi kept her back straight, shoulders aligned, and hands resting firmly on the glass table. Across from her, the board members glanced at one another, trying to hide their discomfort. Some mumbled under their breath. Others were still processing the information. And Ryan stood, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, eyes fixed on her with a mix of disbelief and resentment. The atmosphere was heavy. And though the will had spoken for itself, respect was still not guaranteed. Naomi felt it. She could sense the silent resistance in the air. the judgment that persisted even after the truth had been read aloud. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes briefly and stood, with the same steady posture she had when she entered that room hours earlier. She walked slowly to the end of the table, each step deliberate, like someone who knew time was finally on her side, because for years it had been stolen from her. When she stopped, she looked directly at the CFO, then at the VP of Operations, and then at the rest of the board. One by one, she held their gaze without flinching. "If you want to know why I'm here," she said, her voice calm but firm as steel, "I can show you. But if you'd rather keep judging based on assumptions, your story ends here." The sentence landed like thunder. No one replied. No one dared interrupt. Naomi turned her laptop screen toward the center of the table, connecting it to the room's projector. Instantly, detailed graphs appeared. Growth projections, competitor comparisons, risk assessments, and a logistics restructuring plan that cut costs by over 15% without layoffs. All data was documented, with sources, dates, and proven results. "Over the past year," she began, "I was personally invited by Harold Whitmore to review and audit, in secret, every department in this company. I visited 7 branches. I spoke with employees you don't even know by name. I listened to what no one here wanted to hear." She pointed to a graph showing a drop in engagement among operational teams. "This is the turnover rate in our central units, 39%. Do you know why? Lack of purpose-driven leadership. Decisions made from ego, not vision." Faces began to tense. The discomfort was growing, but she kept going. "At the Austin branch, I discreetly implemented a horizontal management model with mixed teams. The result?" She clicked the remote and revealed a rising chart. "Net profit increased by 22% in 3 months. Productivity rose by 31%. The legal director cleared his throat, uneasy. "You carried this out without the board's knowledge?" "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "Authorized by Harold. Because he knew that if I asked for permission, I'd never get the chance. Not with you." She slowly turned to Ryan. "You said you dedicated your whole life to this company. I've dedicated mine to proving I deserved to exist. While you inherited meetings, I fought for interviews. While you were groomed to take the throne, I fought not to be kicked out of the room." Ryan bit his lower lip, but didn't respond. Naomi then made the final move. She opened another folder and spread copies of reports across the table. "These are the numbers. This is the vision. This is the future." Silence. Long enough for the board members to be forced to face the only truth left. She was ready. Not by name, but by preparation. One of them, the quietest of the group, an Asian man in a grey suit with a calm expression, who rarely spoke in meetings, looked at Naomi and said, "When do you start?" She didn't smile. She simply replied, "I already have." The emotional camera of the scene, whether from a drama or real life, would slowly zoom out at that moment, eyes still fixed on her, and the laptop screen still glowing with strategic data. The music, if there were any, would be tense but hopeful, because everyone could feel that something had changed. Whitmore Industries would never be the same. Still in the boardroom, the papers Naomi had laid out on the table remained untouched, yet now drew their eyes like dynamite ready to blow. The air, once filled with judgment, was now heavy with anticipation. No board member dared to interrupt her. What once was noise and outrage was now silence, the kind born when undeniable truths forced themselves into the light. Naomi seized the moment. She picked up the projector remote calmly and clicked to show the next slide. On the screen, 3 large graphs appeared. One in dark blue labeled revenue, another in green marked turnover, and the last in orange titled ESG Recognition, National Benchmark. "This is the Denver branch," she began. "6 months ago, Harold authorized me to run a full pilot test of the plan you've just seen. The operation was carried out under another name, with no direct link to headquarters. None of the staff knew who I was. No customer knew it was an experiment." She walked toward the board, the eyes of the executives following her as if every step she took was either a threat or a promise. "In the first 90 days, we had a 28% increase in gross revenue, even with minimal cuts to advertising. Why? Because we created real engagement, based on active listening and co-leadership. Each team began participating directly in the decisions of their own department. And when people feel heard, they give more." She clicked again. "Turnover, the employee attrition rate, dropped 40%. That was in just 4 months. We replaced the traditional hierarchical model with agile cells and continuous training. We promoted 4 internal employees who now lead areas previously managed by outside hires. The HR director, who had seemed bored until that moment, shifted in his seat. Now, he was paying attention. But it wasn't just about technical performance," Naomi continued, her voice even firmer. "What stood out the most was the national recognition the branch received 2 months ago." She showed a newspaper headline on the screen. "Whitmore, Denver, named National Standout for Social and Environmental Governance." Beside it, an image of a diverse team smiling in front of a mural with phrases like, "We grow together, we care together." And in the center, subtly, was Naomi, not as a boss, but as part of the team. "We received the ESG Platinum Seal from the National Corporate Sustainability Association." It was the first time a Whitmore unit had ever reached that level. Ryan, still leaning against the wall, looked even paler. His eyes shifted between the graphs and the faces of the other executives. The discomfort was obvious. Naomi stopped in front of him, not confronting, but making it clear that this moment could not be erased. "You called me inexperienced," she said. "Said I didn't know the company. But while you were collecting inherited titles, I was rebuilding what was falling apart from the inside." Senior board member Mr. Bradley mumbled something under his breath. "What was that, Mr. Bradley?" Naomi asked. He cleared his throat. "I said, the results speak for themselves, and at this point, I have nothing more to argue." Naomi simply nodded. She looked again at the projection. The last graph still glowed on the screen, like a silent verdict. "What I did in Denver was just a rehearsal. The full plan goes far beyond that. And now, with authority and resources, I can scale that model across the entire group and take Whitmore to places it never had the courage to go." The silence was absolute. Naomi then stepped back and turned off the projector. The screen went black, like the end of a chapter, but her gaze didn't lose its intensity. "If anyone still thinks I'm here by chance, I suggest you take another look at your own numbers." She returned to her chair and sat down, not just to assume command, but to redefine what it means to lead. And across the table, one by one, the directors began to lower their eyes. Hours after the meeting that officially sealed Naomi's rise, the halls of Whitmore Industries were buzzing. Whispers echoed across floors, phones buzzed non-stop, and a rising murmur gained momentum. The press had discovered the unexpected leadership transition. Naomi stood at the large window of her new office, gazing at the city below. Chicago seemed to breathe a different air, a colder air maybe. Or perhaps it was just the weight of what was still to come. She knew internal resistance wouldn't be defeated by charts and reports. Old power doesn't give up easily, especially when it carries a last name. Across the company, Ryan paced back and forth in his former office, now a neutral space. He still refused to accept the new order. His face was flushed, breathing heavy, and his eyes held the frustration of someone who felt he had lost everything. To someone who never even had a chance to compete. "She destroyed my father's legacy with a slideshow," he muttered to himself, before making a decision that would change everything. Naomi was informed that Ryan had called a press conference. Reporters were already gathered in the lobby, standing beneath the shining Whitmore logo. She made her way down in silence, accompanied only by 2 legal advisors. When she arrived, the cameras were already in place. Ryan stood at the center, dark blue suit, loosened tie, microphone in hand. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice firm but laced with irony. "I imagine many of you have already heard about the changes announced today. A new CEO has been appointed, unexpectedly. I'm not here to contest the legality of it. I'm here to question something more important: legitimacy." The cameras turned. Reporters scribbled notes furiously. "Do you really think someone can run a company like this just because their name is on a piece of paper? A company is built with history, loyalty, and blood, not with surprise clauses in a will." Naomi stepped forward. The crowd parted in silence. She didn't ask permission. She simply took the microphone from an assistant and faced Ryan, with every reporter watching. "You think you get to run this place just because you grew up under the same roof as the founder?" she said, meeting his eyes without hesitation. "You think legitimacy comes from a last name and an inheritance? I'm not here because I inherited a name. I'm here because I built results, even when you ignored me." Some flashes went off. Cameras zoomed in on her. Her tone wasn't one of revenge. It was truth, made undeniable. "While you inherited job titles, I was writing reports in the middle of the night. While you were promoted for being the owner's son, I was called an intern, even with an international MBA. You knew Whitmore from the hallways. I knew it from behind the scenes, the parts no one looks at, where bad decisions kill people's dreams." Ryan tried to interrupt, but she didn't let him. "You say I have no story here, but my story is what supports everything I presented today. And do you know why it makes people uncomfortable? Because it's real, because it wasn't written for convenience. It was built in silence. And now, that silence is over." The crowd, once tense, let out a wave of murmurs. A reporter caught the phrase and posted it on X, formerly Twitter. Within minutes, the hashtag #TheSilenceIsOver was trending. Outside, people began to gather. Some were company employees, others were young people inspired by the story. A black woman from the cleaning staff quietly wiped away a tear while watching everything on a monitor in the break room. Naomi handed back the microphone. She didn't ask for applause, she didn't smile. She simply turned and walked toward the exit of the lobby, leaving behind not just the uproar, but the old version of Whitmore. The next morning, after the public confrontation, Whitmore Industries woke up under national spotlights. Newspapers, online portals, and social media ran headlines in bold. "CEO revealed as founder's hidden daughter takes control and confronts heir on national broadcast." The company's headquarters, at the heart of Chicago's corporate district, seemed to breathe more slowly, as if every decision from that point on would be final. Naomi walked toward the boardroom with steady steps. She wore a deep burgundy suit buttoned up to the neck, black leather shoes, and a thin bracelet on her left wrist, the same one her mother gave her at her Harvard graduation. Outwardly, she kept her composure. Inside, she felt the weight of centuries that CEO chair had never carried before. A black woman, invisible for years, now about to be voted on by a board that had always ignored her. The room was already full. The 12 board members were seated in their fixed spots like a silent court. Before them, a single agenda: to officially ratify or contest Naomi Sinclair's leadership of Whitmore. The vote wasn't mandatory, but pressured by internal sectors and investors, the board had decided to call it. Naomi stood at the center. To her left, a screen displayed the members' names. To her right, the company lawyer stood ready to record the votes. Ryan sat at the end of the table, his face tight, arms crossed. He stared directly at her, without blinking, as if he could knock her down with the intensity of his resentment alone. The lawyer stood. This extraordinary session aims to formalize by board decision the appointment of Naomi Sinclair as CEO and executive leader of Whitmore Industries. Each present member will declare their vote, in favor or against. The vote will be nominal. The first name echoed through the room. Mr. David Langston. The board member, a white man with grey hair and a dark suit, hesitated for 3 seconds. Then, he looked at Naomi and said, "In favor." The second name was called. The operations board member, a Latina woman with a firm expression, responded, "In favor." The third, the fourth, the fifth. One by one, each vote was cast, and more eyes turned to Naomi. One of them, visibly emotional, could barely speak. By the 8th vote, the atmosphere had already shifted. A more conservative member, who had resisted deep changes for years, adjusted his tie and quietly admitted, "In favor, for the results I saw with my own eyes." Everyone knew then the outcome was clear, but 2 votes remained. The second to last, Mr. Bradley stood up. He was the oldest at the table and looked at Naomi as if he finally saw her fully. "Harold Whitmore taught me about numbers, but today I learned about justice, in favor." Then everyone turned to Ryan. The lawyer called him formally. "Mr. Ryan Whitmore, your vote." Ryan took a deep breath, crossed his arms. His eyes were glassy, but his mouth trembled with restrained rage. "Against," he said flatly. A silence settled over the room. But it was too late. The decision was made. Final result: 9 votes in favor, 1 against. The lawyer confirmed aloud. By majority decision, the board officially recognizes Naomi Sinclair as CEO of Whitmore Industries. Effective immediately, with full executive authority. Some board members clapped discreetly, others simply nodded. But a quiet emotion began to spread. The youngest member, an Asian American woman who had watched everything in silence, wiped away a quick tear before composing herself. Naomi looked around. She didn't smile, but her eyes were glowing the way only the eyes of someone who waited a lifetime to finally be seen can glow. She stepped toward the table, placed both hands on the glass surface and said, "Thank you, not just for the votes, but for finally opening your eyes." And then, something unexpected happened. One of the most rigid board members, the same one who had interrupted her in past meetings, stood and said, "Welcome to the helm, Miss Sinclair." The room applauded, not with euphoria, but with dignity. And in the middle of that solemn moment, Naomi allowed herself a small gesture. She touched the bracelet on her left wrist and squeezed it tightly, as if telling her mother, in silence, "I did it." Right after the vote, the news swept across the country. TV stations surrounded Whitmore Industries headquarters, journalists packed the lobby, and the press prepared to hear from the new CEO, Naomi Sinclair. She appeared from the central corridor, wearing a grey blazer over a blue dress. She walked with the posture of someone who knew exactly what she was about to say. Stepping onto the stage, she adjusted the microphone. She wasn't carrying notes. She was carrying history. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice steady. "Today wasn't just a historic day for this company. It was a day when long-buried truths finally found a place." She paused. The cameras zoomed in. The first time I walked in here, I was asked to serve coffee, and I served it. Not out of submission, but because I knew that serving never made me less. What many didn't know is that that coffee was the same one I drank before taking over this company. Flashes burst. The audience went quiet. She continued. Underestimating someone based on appearance or background is one of the most silent forms of failure, and as quiet as it may seem, it can bring down empires from the inside out. I'm not here because someone gave me a seat. I'm here because I built my path, even when they tried to erase me. At the back of the room, a woman from the cleaning staff cried quietly. An intern filmed with his phone. On social media, the quote that went viral appeared in the first posts. The coffee they asked her to serve was the same one she drank before taking the throne. #coffee, toe CEO. Millions watched. The video exploded. Naomi's voice had finally broken through every wall. Weeks later, Whitmore was a different company. Young Black and Latino professionals held roles once thought unreachable. The Whitmore Horizon program created opportunities for overlooked talent, and the Eleanor Fund, founded in honor of Naomi's mother, supported startups led by women. But the most powerful gesture stood at the company's entrance. A glass dome, softly lit, housing a single disposable coffee cup. At its base, a phrase in gold lettering: "To lead is to serve with dignity." One day, before another press conference, Naomi was called to the lobby. Ryan was there. No arrogance, no armor. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, his voice choked. "But today I understand, and I'm ashamed of what I represented." She listened calmly. "Everyone has a beginning, Ryan. Maybe this is yours." Hours later, in front of the cameras, Naomi gave her final statement of the season. "My victory isn't mine alone. It belongs to every person who was ever invisible in a room of power. Change has arrived, and it has a face, a voice, and a story." Outside, the Whitmore electronic sign read, "Now with truth in charge." And inside the glass dome, the cup was still there. Not as a reminder of humiliation, but as a symbol of a legacy. And now I want to know, what did you think of this story? Leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments and tell me what moved you the most. If this story touched your heart, like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. Before you go, I've picked another emotional story that's sure to move you even more. It's right here. Just click and keep watching with us.